Nigeria Limited. Mr. Oyebode is the chairman of Teach for Nigeria, chairman of Teach for All New York, and chairman of African Philanthropy Forum. He is a director of jazz at the Lincoln Center and in New York, and a member of the Board of Trustees, Carnegie Hall in New York. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Ford Foundation, New York. He's a member of the International Council of Collectors. And if you've ever seen his art collection, you'll see why. He's also a member of the Cleveland Museum of Art in Ohio, member Board of Trustees of the African Center in New York, and member of the advisory board of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. So that summarizes Mr. Oyebode, but like I said, it doesn't do him much justice. For me, I am Aisha Rimi, and I am a partner or managing partner of Africa Law Practice, NG & Co. And just so, an interesting fact, when I started law, Mr. Oyebode was my oga at the top. He was my mentor, he was my brother, he was my friend, he was my boss. And whenever you submitted a piece of work to Mr. Oyebode, it would come back with a lot of like biro marks, almost like a teacher had gone over it. And then at the end of it, in very large letters, he would write, "Let's discuss." So on that note, Mr. Oyebode, let's discuss.
Yep.
Thank you. So we've had a whole barrage of questions coming through the those who registered, and so I'll take them randomly. But we also have some questions for you from the SBL, and I think that in answering some of these questions, you might also inadvertently respond to the questions that have been asked by the members who have signed in. So I think for a lot of people, they just really want to know why law? What made you choose law? And subsequently, what made you focus on commercial law?
Aisha, thank you very, very much. First to NBA-SBL for asking me to speak. You know, long introduction that, you know, you made. If you hadn't raised it, I was going to tell people that I've known you in a professional capacity for over 30 years. You know, doesn't tell the truth. Me and you don't look as old as we are.
Well, I started as a teenager, so.
but look, it's a pleasure to be here. Look, to jump into the conversation, why law? You know, and I'm not going to tell you a long story about why I think I decided on law. Actually it's a bit more mundane. You know, actually it was like the only thing I could have come out of university with a degree with that was a profession. So I'm not one of those people that would tell you that it was an instrument of change. You know, the reality was that I was looking for a profession. Given the sort of grades that I came out with in my O levels, law happened to be one of those things that I could get out of high school, but get into university with the intention of studying. But thereafter, it was clear to me that I needed to learn, to excel, and to use the education positively. And I also figured very quickly, very quickly, that it was important not just to be a lawyer in the classic term of being a lawyer, but to get as much experience as was going to be able to allow me to use it to excel. And so what I did was I went off to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, did my LLM. I was class of '82. Thereafter, I said to myself, it's not enough to have left the shores of Nigeria and done something that was slightly different from most of my other colleagues who headed out to the UK. I felt it was important to, as I had spent time in North America, you know, to round the circle and get some work experience. So I took the New York bar. I joined White and Case in New York, spent time really trying to understand how practice in North America was structured. Decided that I also wanted to get some in-house counsel experience. After my period at White and Case, I went off to work with an old Gulf oil company in Houston. And the intention always was that I was going to end up in Nigeria in very, very short order. So moved back to Nigeria with Gulf and started working in Lagos. And again, became an oil and gas lawyer. So if you ask me where I started out from, it was pure oil and gas. In those days, that was the real area of focus. And so corporate commercial was very tangential to that. So I look back, all these 40 odd years, and I think, I've enjoyed what I do. I've enjoyed the ability to do corporate commercial law, banking and finance, project finance, oil and gas, the sort of things that have kept me focused really around infrastructure development in Nigeria, around delivering the objectives, around making sure that either way, we didn't have to live in New York or London to practice like the guys who live there. And that's been one of my motivations all along.
That's excellent. And it actually just ties into the next question, which was, your professional journey. But on this journey, along this path, have there been any significant milestones or accomplishments that you think have, guided you or helped shape your career that you're extremely proud of? I'm sure there are many.
There are so many that I couldn't even think of it at this point. Look, I think that being a law firm leader, being a leader of the profession, that was a motivation. That in the good old days when we worked together in the old Gbenga Oyebode and Aluko, one of the things that that firm was meant to signify, and which it did, essentially was that, we were a full service law firm, and we wanted to make sure that we were the best at what we did. So that was particularly important. Thereafter, Gbenga Oyebode is set up in, I think it was January '93, and pretty much kept that flag flying, full service firm, tried to do everything we did extremely well, tried to develop the areas of practice, tried to be not just necessarily a big practice, but one that was significant in the work we did it extremely well. So the milestones for me were, copying what we considered to be the leading firms at that time. Who were the leading firms? It was Chris Ogumanjo & Co. It was the likes of Ojuju and Adefulu. And so that was important for us. So that was a milestone. What were the other milestones? It was also trying to understanding that practicing law in and of itself wasn't the end game. The end game was also how do we contribute to national development, either being in the development of young lawyers or being in the development of governance, corporate governance. And so one of the things that was very clear to me that I was going to do as we went along was that I enjoyed the fact that great corporate lawyers sat on boards. Not just did they sit on boards because they were shareholders, they sat on boards because actually they understood how corporates manage companies, how they manage their stakeholders, how they protected the interests of minority shareholders. So again, along the way, that became something that I did. I enjoyed that. The very fact that developing a network was important for the practice of law, but was also important for the development of clients. And so, there are lots of milestones, both personally and good ones and maybe not so good ones. But I think at the end of the day, the reality for me was, how do you use your experience, not just to grow yourself, but to grow the people around you. And that's one of the things that I'm most proud about. the fact that over the years, the alumni of the firms that one had the privilege of establishing, are all over the place. And there's no time that I walk into a crowd of lawyers that I don't see somebody that over the years I have been able to impact on.
Myself included. So myself included. And I think that kind of, you came into law at a time when a lot of firms were pretty much, even though you call them firms, but they were very much family oriented and family run and sort of revolved around named principles and sort of, there wasn't really a history of them sort of going beyond 1 or 2 generations. So, and I think one of your biggest legacies is that you've been able to build an institution, one that is easily recognizable world over, certainly on the continent and across the world, if I may say so. So how easy has it, or what was the journey like in terms of building this institution, and then also having this amazing succession plan that has seen it able to survive its founding members?
Look, I think, I'll go back to that, the point I made earlier on about how one wanted to build a firm that would survive, whether it was London, New York, or Lagos. And so part of that was first building a sustainable law firm. So it was sustainable from the perspective of, it wasn't about self, it was about all of us. It wasn't about self, it was about the services we provided, the experiences that we shared. And then I finally got to the stage where, I was able to then say, look, part of this legacy that one needs to leave behind has to be a legacy around sustainability, around the enduring legacy. And for me, what that meant was that, after 40 years of doing the same thing, to continue to do it would be total madness, or at least do it the exact same way. And so it was time to hand over to the next generation. And by the way, the next generation always existed in the firm, knew that they were going to take over the firm and take it forward. And I think that if I were to advise law firm leaders, what I would say to them is that, we're all not here forever. We may practice law for as long as we want, but our ability to lead over the same period is one that, there are people who may lead for all their lives, but actually the game changer is your ability to train, to mentor, and to identify people within firms that can push the envelope. And so that's something I've done all my life. That's something I continue to do. And I do it not necessarily just for our law firm. I tend to do it. I speak at functions whenever I'm asked. I try and mentor whenever people ask me. I tend to try to be a positive role model because, there are more people who look up to role models than there are that you can touch directly as a mentor. And so that for me is the part of the legacy that I think I would like to leave behind.
Great, thank you. So one of the things you talked about earlier was how you cast your net wide in the US and you worked in the firm and in corporate world. How adaptable do you think, or how easy is it, do you think, to apply these international standards? Because the world is changing. There's globalization, people are looking for good quality advice, legal and commercial advice, wherever it arises. So how easy has it been to be able to adapt those international standards to your practice?
Look, I'm not going to say it's been easy. One thing I will say is that whether we like it or not as Nigerian lawyers, and one of the things that we need to accept is that we're actually operating in one of the most difficult operating conditions anywhere in the world. So I tend to tell clients, think of something that could go wrong, anything. Chances are that it will happen to you in Nigeria, and it would happen to you not just one at a time, all of it. would happen. We tend to think that we're immune, but we've built all kinds of levels of protection around us, you know, from infrastructure to power to high turnover of our staff, to just the typical challenges that, you know, maybe in other parts of the world, people tend not to see or even to dimension. And as part of building a successful, sustaining business, these are all things that you have to think about. So my view, at the end of the day, you know, building a sustainable, I mean, by the way, I understand why people have one-man run law firms. I understand why people want to run a family businesses. You know, so you don't have the challenge of dealing with people you don't know, or handing over to somebody that you think you shouldn't hand over to. I tend to tell my partners, you know, partnership is like marriage. Huh? Chances are that in our typical African fashion, we don't have joint accounts with your spouse at home, but you're forced to have a joint account with your partner in the office. The flip side of it is, I also tell my wife, I spend 12 hours at home, and of those 12 hours, 8 of them are sleeping hours. I tend to spend 12 hours with my partners in the office, and I'm wide awake trying to achieve objectives and drive success. So I think it's you know, the operating environment is difficult. Trying to build a firm, especially one that you are pushing an envelope around building a large firm, is very on Nigerian in a sense. But I don't think that should stop us. I think we need to compete. I think competing with world-class law firms is something that should be second nature to us. And by the way, as difficult as I say this operating environment is, I run into international law firms all the time who, and I know they don't say this out of jest or just to make up for how we operate. Typically, one of the things that they do say is that across the board, the Nigerian lawyers that they engage with are some of the best that they engage with around the world. And I think that's also because of the nature of our people. We want to achieve, and we push the envelope to achieve.
Great. So you've touched on two things that I'd like to pick up on, but let's park the globalization and Nigerian lawyers and transferability of the profession and services. Let's talk. When you said that when you advise clients, you tell them how difficult it is. This past administration has talked a lot about the ease of doing business and has, in fact, passed certain laws and set up regulations and stuff. How effective do you think this has been? And in your 40 Hello?
Yeah, you're back. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I think you lost me for a second. I was talking about the ease of doing business, the relative ease of doing business. And you talked about it when you said you advise clients anything that can go wrong, could go wrong, and it happened usually in an avalanche. So we know the past administration has talked a lot about the ease of doing business. Have you felt the effect in terms of your clientele and how, and certainly in the 40 years, I'm sure there's been an improvement in 40 years, but certainly as far as this in recent times are concerned and the laws that have been passed to facilitate, like the Business Facilitation Act, how effective do you think it has been or can be?
Look, first let me say that ease of doing business, all the efforts of this administration, particularly the Vice President's office, I must commend. I think extremely great steps that government has taken, extremely great achievements that they've made. I have a problem. My problem is that we tend to do 10 steps forward and we do 9 back. So today, as much as it is that we have a visa on arrival policy, I do not know anybody that's done a Nigerian visa on arrival that does not complain about spending 2 hours at the airport trying to get out. So let's understand that as much as it is that we tend to think we're doing the right things, we tend to take it away through the inconsistencies, the inefficiencies inbuilt in our systems. So I'm not going to say to you that, whatever I say is driven by the numbers. I tend to follow numbers. So when you see for FDI into Nigeria at an all-time low, so you may have a great ease of doing business policy, but it can only be justified by when you see the FDI flows into. Not only do you not see FDI flows, you don't even see foreign portfolio flows on the stock market. So there's a disconnect. What's that disconnect? If you don't have a foreign currency regime that recognizes the ability of investors to bring money into a country and confirms their ability to take our profits out of the country, and so what's the point of having these laws that give the impression that everything is fine? So I don't want to take anything away from the administration. I think that the ease of doing business people have done as much as they can do. It's the totality of the results of that effort that we should focus on. And I haven't seen that yet.
Yes, I know. And we see it every day, the bottlenecks, the bureaucracy, the red tape. And so when you're advising clients and they say, but we read this and we hear this and we know we can do this, and in practice, it's actually very difficult. I mean, even incorporating companies, even ordinary searches for companies is still very difficult. In fact, yesterday I had a call from somebody who applied for a visa, was told he could get it in 48 hours. And it's been 2 weeks and he's been unable to even get a response. Nobody's, responding. Then he tried to do the visa on arrival and he said they asked for a whole bunch of documents that just made it very difficult. So he's actually thinking of canceling his trip. So I think we do tend to agree with you in that respect. So if you were to advise the incoming administration, with your wealth of experience, if you were to advise them what the things that they should be looking at, in terms, because we all talk about foreign investment and what's that, an enabling environment. What are the areas that they should be looking at and focusing on?
Look, solving Nigeria's problems actually is not as difficult as we all make it out to be. I think that a lot of our problems can be solved low-hanging fruit. The key issue is messaging. I think if you message right, I think you'd actually solve a lot of problems. I don't want to talk about the more economic type issues around foreign currency, the exchange regime, and the subsidy. I think all of us know that if we don't do something about the subsidy, this story that we are talking about today is going to repeat itself over the next few years. So I'm not even going to go down that road. I think that's clear. I think so. I say it's low-hanging fruit because I think that there's always a sense in our messaging that foreign investors come to Nigeria to take our cheese and eat it. Well, the reality is that most countries in the world, even the Chinese, needed net foreign inflows to get to where they are today. So a reliance or a view that says that maybe we don't need foreign investors, particularly in oil and gas or in banking, or is one that where we shoot ourselves in the foot. I think it's important for us to recognize that the world is increasingly growing, that there's innovation around the world, that innovation is about young people primarily, but it's also about capital, that we don't have enough capital to change our circumstances in the country, that every new capital that comes in is welcome, should be welcome, should be celebrated, and that we must understand that where foreign investors bring capital, that if they're successful, they take their profits and dividends out. And by the way, foreign investors that fail. And we've seen lots of them. So foreign investment is not guaranteed to succeed. It only succeeds because you invest well and you manage it well. So I think that you know, there is a way in which we can manage our situations better. You know, education is one of them. I think that the gaps between available opportunities for our young to get into universities, we need to close the gap. We have net unemployment. I don't even want to talk about underemployment. I think that, you know, our work is cut out for us. I don't think we need a rocket scientist to dimension what's needed from an investment perspective, from a solutions perspective, and from a knowledge perspective. So it's, you know, I'm very optimistic about Nigeria. I think that, you know, I look forward to the incoming administration changing dimensioning things differently. I think that the change that we need is not one that we need to go study to implement or to discover. I think you know, it can be done and done in very short order.
So thank you. Subsidy, very touchy subject, but also let's talk about something that's topical in that area. What impact do you think this Dangote Refinery is going to have in terms of our energy and what it'll do for energy consumption and pricing? And that's, and you know, when we talk about investment, we keep talking about foreign investment, but here's a local investor who has decided to put his money where, you know, where his mouth is. What is your view on that?
I don't want to isolate any particular investment. I'd like to celebrate all investors in Nigeria, big or small, because sometimes we underestimate the impact that entrepreneurs that we see every day, their contribution to nation building, their contribution to national development. And I don't want us to underestimate them. I want us to celebrate all our investors. I think sometimes we tend to focus on particular investors because we hear a lot of them. At the end of the day, the value of our investment should be about a level playing field that encourages all of us to invest. So I think that the Dangote Refinery is a change maker. But I also don't think it's the panacea that lots of people are making it out to be. At the end of the day, investors invest for a return. They don't invest for charity. And so whether it is a local Nigerian investor or a foreign investor, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I suspect that, you know, we will understand that any investment in the country that is not done on a level playing field, one that does not reflect the realities of the marketplace, one that is sustained either by a subsidy regime or by inconsistencies in application of rules and regulations, will not serve the best interests of the generality of Nigerians. So I welcome the investment. I'm totally supportive and you know, I look forward to its success, but I look forward to all of us operating in a level playing field, one that allows for all of us to thrive, and one where the rules and regulations will support several refineries and chemical and fertilizer plants across the country, because the country can sustain it and because the opportunities are there for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you. So again, talking about topical issues, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement or Association. Nigeria is a signatory. We should be gearing up for common services across the continent. How do you think Nigerian firms can position themselves? Because you talked earlier about Nigerian firms having some of the best lawyers that exist in the world. How do you think we should be positioning ourselves? Because I mean, I think the sense is that the Nigerians are going to come and take over this entire thing again.
Look, I think one of the things that I think all of us need to pay attention to is that there's a proliferation of Nigerian businesses across the continent. Nigerian lawyers actually haven't had the benefit of sharing in the success of Nigerian multinationals and Nigerian oligarchs who have been investing across the continent. That should be the benefit of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, at least for Nigerian professionals. The fact that Nigerian banks are now significantly showing up across the continent, opening their branches, operating in countries that are far flung. Nigerian multinationals, primarily set up by oligarchs, own significant assets across the country. What that should translate into is the ability of Nigerian firms to follow their client. By the way, that's how international law firms do. They follow their clients as they spread across the world, whether it was Korea, Japan, China, whether it was Latin America. Their ability to grow was driven by clients that moved across borders. We haven't seen that because sometimes petty jealousies, people are afraid of Nigerians, whether Nigerian law firms or Nigerian businesses. But I think increasingly, when there's a level playing field that allows others to set up law firms in Nigeria, but also allows Nigerians to set up law firms across the continent. Nigerian law firms have over the years treated Ghana as a destination, but that's the only destination. And the feedback sometimes is that it's also difficult. Difficult not necessarily because it's a difficult operating market, but difficult because there's a perception that Nigerians want to take over the market. So there's resistance. But I think increasingly, when the Continental Free Trade Agreement becomes embedded, we will see a lot more success. We'll see a lot more acceptance, and then we should essentially support the move by Nigerian law firms across the continent.
Fantastic, super. So let's move on to the SBL as it is, and you're one of the founding members of the SBL. How effective do you think the SBL has been in terms of professional, in terms of assisting or providing support to commercial lawyers? And then, of course, as a spin-off to that is, where do you think we should be looking? How do you think we should be positioning ourselves?
Look, and this is not a bias. I mean, this is more one of the things that the SBL has done over the years. It's been that of all the sections of the Nigerian Bar Association, the one that people talk about the most, the one that seems to be achieving its objectives, the one that its annual conferences are successful, the one that others want to be like, is the SBL. And I think that in itself is confirmation of the great work that the founding fathers and all the executive boards of the SBL since inception, the role that they played, the vision that they had, and the execution of strategy that we've seen. So I'm particularly proud of the SBL, but I also think that we could be doing so much more. I think that in the area of continuing legal education, one of the things that we need to do a lot more of, particularly given the diversity that we're seeing around skill sets and subject matter and growth areas around venture capital, startups, technology, innovation. I think that it's important that we move with the times, and that's not to say that I'm not seeing the developments around that. I think it's important, and I think that that's a direction we should move in. The other thing that I think is that, as commercial lawyers, maybe even as lawyers, one of the things that never fails to surprise me is how our lawyers are not numerate. They tend not to think in numbers.
Yes.
With a country where the economy is the biggest factor, but it's also the biggest drawback. And just the very fact that our lawyers are not entrepreneurial, and I don't mean entrepreneurial so that they can go and set up their own law firms. I just mean entrepreneurial in the way they approach opportunities. So I think that we still have our work cut out for us in that respect. So again, my view, the SBL is doing a fantastic job. It's proven its need. It's proven that it's relevant. It's leading from the front. But I also don't want us to rest on our oars. I think that with the numbers of lawyers that are, particularly the younger lawyers that are joining the profession every year, it's become clear that there needs to be a paradigm shift of some sort in how we reach them, how we coach them, how we mentor them, how we drive ethical behavior, and how we role model for them. All of these kind of issues. And some of them are not just issues that you can solve at section level. Some of them are issues around the profession itself. How we train our lawyers, whether the Nigerian law school is fit for purpose, given the numbers of lawyers have been generated. Why don't we learn from the changes that the world, particularly in North America and increasingly in the UK, how lawyers are trained, and we need to send lawyers to a school where they learn by rote, just so that they get admitted to practice. I think these are some of the conversations that all of us must have, because the world is not standing still in one place. The total, things are changing, and we need to move with the times.
Yeah, totally agree with you. In fact, I had a board evaluation meeting yesterday, and it's a board that deals with a finance-related company, and they asked me some questions, and I said, I don't understand numbers. And the man said, don't worry, this is a problem we have with every lawyer that has sat on the board. So I actually asked for training. Because even though I sit on this board, sometimes when they're talking numbers, it just goes over my head. So I agree with you in terms of the numeracy skills. I think that's very important. We tend to shy away from it. And that probably explains why we studied law in the first place anyway, because we're the people who didn't know maths or didn't understand numbers. So while we're still on the subject of the SBL, we've got a conference coming up, as you know, in July. And the theme this year is the Nigerian business landscape, priorities for law, policy, and regulation. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think generally, I also want your thoughts on how effective you think these conferences are. Would we benefit more from having smaller events or these large 2-day conferences? I know it's traditionally how it's been done, but when we talk about innovation as well, we also have to think about how we approach things and our members, and certainly the community that we seek to reach out to. So sometimes I've been asked about how effective conferences are, and is it just a talk fest, or what should we be looking at doing to improve?
Honestly, I think one of the things that the SBL has done particularly well is the conferences. So what would I do different? I still would do our one big conference a year. But I still think that we need to punctuate it. And by the way, the SBL is doing that already with this sort of engagement. Identifying leaders that we want to speak to. I think we need to do have more engagement. I think the current board of the SBL is doing that. I think setting up the different committees is especially understanding that actually the life and blood of most bar associations are the committees within the section. because today we're developing more skills, more practice areas, and sometimes there are people who just want to speak to specific subject matter, and I think that I'm already starting to see that happen. So I'm not even going to. What I will say to you is that I'm totally in support. I encourage. I think we should do more. I think we shouldn't wait for the big bang. The big bang will happen. The SBL's annual conference is a must attend. I suspect the numbers keep going up year on year for a reason, because people look forward to it, and because it's not around the SBL's conference is not around an election for board seats. It's around subject matter, and I think that's particularly important and attractive.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Well, we have about 15 minutes left. And when I asked members to send in questions, I had no idea I would get over 60 questions. So I'll just go through them randomly. And for those whose questions I don't get to, please forgive me. But like I said, there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack, and people clearly just want to know how you've done what you do. But one of the things is, that struck me is, what parameters do you use in deciding whether to join the board of a company? So these are questions that have come from the members generally. I'm just going to pick up random questions.
So sorry, repeat that. What parameters do I use?
What parameters do you use in deciding whether to join the board of a company?
Lots of different parameters. First, it needs to be an industry that I think I understand, so that I can contribute. Needs to be a leader in its space, needs to reflect the values that I think I stand for. Those are the kind of, look, I'm doing a lot more non-profit boards today than I was doing years ago. Why? Because I'm at a part of my life where I think giving back is more important. So a lot of my activity today is around philanthropy, but not philanthropy from the perspective of it just being a local effort, from it being a global effort, from it being an Africa-wide perspective. I think that I dimension my contribution today around global issues, and so I tend to pitch to things like education, because I think it's a change agent, it's a change maker. It's the difference between living in one century or accentuating and jumping into the changes that I think we all deserve. So there's really no hard and fast rule. I suspect that the key element is around ethical behavior.
Right.
It must and sustainability. People may think it's a glib term, but it captures behavior. It captures advancement in technology. It captures innovation, and the sort of values that keep me motivated.
Okay, there are two questions here which I think I will merge, and it's about business communication. But then another question talks about personal branding. What are your tips for personal branding and maintaining cordial relationships with industry leaders? But I think it also ties into the question on, could you please advise on proper business communication?
It's a bit of a general question, and I'll speak to it generally.
Yes.
Look, at the end of the day, all of us need to understand that the market perceives us based on what they see of us. And therefore, personal branding is not something that it's something you do, but it's also something you live. And as you live it, you tend to have an expectation. And it comes by the choices you make. So you make some choices that you don't think they send a signal, but by the way they do. What kind of law firm that you work in? What skill sets do you have you specialized in? What kind of companies do you keep? I think that all of those things are particularly important from the perspective of personal branding and positioning, not just for self, but for organization. And I think the more attention people pay, the more they reap the rewards. And so it's important, in my view, to take a view, because at the end of the day, legacy is built on some of it is perception, some of it is hard work, but all of it rolled into one is what it's a signal that you send based on how you live.
Yeah. Yeah. Very important. I like that line, but it's not just about what you it's not just about what you do, but it's what you live as well. It's what you exude. It's the image that you project. So it's everything from your personal image to your professional and personal life or lifestyle. So one of the things that keeps coming up is about mentorship. People seeking mentorship. Is that something you do formally? Is that something you would do formally? And you know, again, the second part of that is what advice would you give a young lawyer starting out today?
So let me take I'll do the first one about mentorship. Do I do it formally? The answer is yes.
Okay.
How do you do it to achieve the objective given lack of time, availability, identifying who the mentee is? Sometimes there's no formal opportunity. With the best will in the world, people seek you out. And if they do, within the realms of available time, I think it's entirely achievable to be able to mentor. What I like to say to people, though, that role modeling is as important, if not more. And so I grew up at a time when...
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I missed that. Role modeling is what? I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Role modeling is actually more
I see,
than
okay.
So I grew up at a time when there were people in society that I didn't have access to, but I modeled myself based on what I saw of them. So one of my role models, and he's still alive, was Chris Ogbubanjo, and he ran the biggest law firm in the country. And he sat on lots of boards.
Yes.
He had the benefit and the privilege of sitting around the table in the 70s when indigenization was taking place. So he advised, he invested, and he participated. And if you looked at it, you would say, oh my God, those sort of times can never come back. But they are back in the sense, not necessarily that we're going through an indigenization, but if you decided that that role model, how he built his life is what you want to do. So some of us, and there were lots of colleagues of mine that worked at Chris Ogbubanjo and Co. Georgie Tomi, Udoma Udoma, Aswe Godalo, Chief Dipo Duduri himself. Lots of people worked there and learned lessons from working at Chris Ogbubanjo that you can see that they translated into how they built their law firms and what they've done since then. So please understand that even if you're not able to reach the person to mentor you, can you please try and understand what they've been through in their lives? Read about them, their stories, what kind of schools they went, what kind of experiences they've had in life, what kind of practices they've built. Post-practice, what type of opportunities did they, so that on the day you meet the individual, you can say to him, by the way, you know what, I've learned so much from you. You don't know me, but I wanted to be like you ever since I started reading about you. That's what life is about.
Sure. Sure.
And so to as a segue to your second question, that's what I tell young ones, people that around me. I say to them, look, if you can't reach me, by the way, let's, every once in a while, within the best way possible, I will speak at conferences. I will speak at to groups. I will try and give up my time, but it just may be difficult to do the one-on-one mentorship.
Sure.
that you deserve. But that shouldn't be a battle. It shouldn't be a battle of how we develop, how we see ourselves, how we deliver the objective, how we engage. It shouldn't be there shouldn't be any restriction in the way we do what we do and how we learn. And some people just learn from the lives of great men by reading biographies and autobiographies. That in itself is a veritable way of learning. And so I'm totally in support of mentorship, but I'm more inclined to say to you that role modeling is also a way of achieving the objective.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think so from some aspiring applicants to A&O, how do you attract and retain talent? I mean, we know, the culture of an A&O lawyer is one that is easily recognizable, it's enviable, it's commendable. So how is it that you're able to attract and retain? And that ties into another question which has popped up a few times in terms of remuneration for lawyers. Yeah, yes. It's a very sensitive subject, but it's been asked a few times. So I would be remiss if I did not bring it up.
So let me answer the remuneration question first. I think, look, it's a difficult call. I think that pair law firms, similar to A&O, and there are lots of them, tend to match each other in terms of compensation.
Yes.
So what I would say to the market and to the young ones is that it's horses for courses. So very similar to the way that Magic Circle and Wall Street law firms compete around compensation. Peer law firms at the top of the food chain in this market tend to consistently do surveys to determine what their competitors are paying and try very much to compete based on that. So I think that that's the new way of doing things. I know that this is not an across the board occurrence. I think it's a change that we all deserve. I think in a difficult operating environment where we all dump it down in terms of compensation for professional services. And by the way, it's not just lawyers, it's all professional service firms. If you don't have a brand that's a multinational brand, people tend to discount you and tend to almost question your fees. I think invariably we're going to get there. I think one of the reasons I like the Continental Free Trade Agreement is that actually at the end of the day, it is to the benefit of all of us, particularly people that do cross-border transactions,
Yes.
and will gain the benefits of other markets where there's an insistence on skill, on knowledge, on ability. I think there's still a general view in our market that lawyers are fungible. As you know, that's not true. The fact that your father is a lawyer doesn't mean that you're a good lawyer. And the fact that you've done a small transaction doesn't mean you'll be able to do a big transaction. I think my view will still continue to invest in people, invest in the firms, invest in the infrastructure. I think that's going to be the game changer, the difference in law firms. It will take time, but I think increasingly we're starting to see within the country multinationals, oligarchs, major Nigerian institutions that are starting to recognize differences in skill set and ability. And all I can say is that that in itself will drive compensation up, but it will more importantly drive an investment in law firms such that we continue to practice at the very top of the profession and deliver the results. I'm sorry, I forgot what the first question was.
No, it's about attracting and retaining talent.
How do we attract talent? It's by looking for the best talent. I think one of the things, in spite of what people say about how the Nigerian legal profession or the Nigerian educational system is not fit for purpose, what I will say to you is that I continue to see every year the very best and the brightest. They tend to do youth corps and spend a couple of years with us, and then they go off to the best schools in the world to do a master's. What that proves to me is that the country continues to generate particularly bright professionals, and that if you seek them out, you will find them. That if you hire them, mentor them, train them, that they remain committed, and that even when they go off, the chances are that they may come back. And at the end of the day, one of the things that I'm proudest about is that the alumni of these firms remain our best ambassadors, whether they go in-house or they go to international firms or work for DFIs. At the end of the day, that investment in your people, you will continue to reap from. So all I can say is that, hire the best and the brightest, and the rewards and the benefits will definitely be coming.
Fantastic. I can't believe it. We literally have 2 minutes left and I still have so many questions. But, I think I'm just going to give you a final say. I think if you hadn't become a lawyer,
Yes.
what do you think you would have done?
No, I don't want to say anything rude. Let me just say, let me just say that, look.
Just make it politically correct.
No. Let me just say that
your kids are listening.
let me say that I enjoy what I'm doing.
Yes.
I've had the privilege of doing it for almost 40 years. If there was a message that I would leave on the table for the young ones, the very fact that I say that me and you have been doing this for over 30 years, what that message means is that this thing is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Absolutely.
So please don't look at the examples, the typical examples, and say that, oh, I want to be like him. But please understand that you can't take the benefit without the burden. There's a lot of hard work, a lot of experience, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of challenges, lots of failures that we don't want to talk about. We tend to only focus on the successes, but understand that the only way that this thing is going to work is to stay the course. And while there are examples of people who made it relatively easily and without a lot of stress, actually, most of us struggle hard to achieve the objective. And I count myself as one of those. So what you see at the end of 40 years, whether it's a successful law firm or sitting on boards, didn't happen overnight. Happened because one paid attention, happened because one worked hard, happened because one invested, happened because one also made the right decisions around partners and associates and all of that. And it's the only real marker that I can put on the ground. It's not going to happen overnight, and it does happen overnight for some people, but not for all of us.
Well, I was going to ask for parting words of wisdom, but I think you've said it, you've tied it up very, very nicely. Mr. Oyebode, our GO in the legal profession, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful hour. I've had a great time doing this, and I'm glad we've come back full circle to where we started. Thank you so much for giving us your time, your words of wisdom, and all your experience. And I'm sure the rest of the expo and everybody else who is on is just as appreciative of your time. So thank you. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to have been. Okay, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
All right, you too. You too. Bye-bye now.